I've been asked to reflect on 20 years of regeneration in this city. And I think that's rather fortuitous that it just kind of coincides that I've been here 20 years. I don't want to make this too personal, but I think my reflections will be from a particular viewpoint in terms of my experience of this city, which actually goes back beyond just my working career here. I studied here in the 1970s, and I remember the city then, and I remember it fondly, and it was one of the reasons why I decided to come back here 20 years ago. I first arrived here as a trainee tyre fitter to work for a couple of days in a tyre shop here in Dundee, and I was absolutely petrified coming from Perth as a St Johnstone supporter to the big city of Dundee. So I've had multiple kind of images of Dundee in my mind over the time. So I want to set the 20 years of experience of regeneration in Dundee within a slightly longer timescale, because I think the roots of where we are today go back a lot further. And I'll just bring up the presentation. Okay, so an odd image to bring up to tell the story of regeneration in Dundee. Why would I show an early 1950s image of St Andrews? It's fantastic, isn't it? Except it's not St Andrews. That's the Overgate in Dundee. Dundee was essentially a medieval city. At one time, the second city of Scotland before we discovered the Americas, and Glasgow grew and Aberdeen grew because of other reasons. And so the importance of this city goes back long into history, and particularly then in its industrialisation with the famous 3 Js. We had a fantastic historical stock in the city, and you can imagine that being available now today. It would be a conservation area of outstanding importance and a whole process of restoring and protecting that area. But like many cities at the time, the planning attitude to this kind of area was to propose comprehensive redevelopment. And this was the proposal for the Overgate area in Dundee. And I've worked in many cities, and I've seen similar plans in Glasgow, Manchester, various other places. It was de rigueur in the 60s and the 70s. The thing about Dundee is that, God, we did it. So here's the Overgate Centre that was built after the demolition of that fine medieval area. And I can remember as a student being taught that this was what planning was to achieve. We had to study this, draw it, understand it, so that we could replicate it across the country. It's quite incredible the way that I think it resonates in the psyche of Dundonians. I think it kind of undermined their trust in planners. It undermined their trust in municipalities to actually deliver regeneration. It was very much physical regeneration. I don't think in any way it was linked to communities or society or anything of that nature. Initially very popular. The Angus Hotel, which occupied this particular corner, I can remember it's the place where I had my first gin and tonic, and I was very impressed by it as a hotel. But it created an image of our city. It created a sort of disjoint in the fabric of the city, and it allowed Dundee to lose its place within the regional pattern in Scotland, I believe. We lost a lot of our importance as a regional centre. The city centre was very much characterised by this image, not a very pleasant place to come and shop. And the image of Dundee, particularly when I moved back to the west coast, was very bad in terms of how it was regarded in the rest of Scotland. And I think what's very important to understand where we are today is that the city at that time recognised what it had done to itself. And there was a whole campaign just towards the end of Dundee District Council and the transformation into the City Council at local government reorganisation about putting the heart back into the city. That was a really big campaign by the council at the time. And it meant trying to address the environmental conditions here and to bring, certainly within the centre of Dundee, but that spreading out to other communities, about physical, economic and social regeneration all coming together as a linked package. The construction of the ring road around the city centre, while that in some ways was a bad thing in the way that it created a concrete collar around Dundee City Centre, it did allow for the pedestrianisation works that were undertaken at that time. And, you know, that's an incredible contrast in terms of the environmental quality of our city centre. A really high-quality pedestrian environment that started to bring people back into the heart of Dundee and to capture and regain our regional catchment area. And I think on the back of that investment and that commitment to putting the heart back into the city allowed the Overgate Centre to be tackled. This was the Overgate Centre that I remember. I think a lot of Dundonians will remember the centre. That's probably at its best. It went downhill from there. The Wellgate Centre was constructed at the other end of our main shopping high street, and the Overgate started to go down market. But I think on the back of that investment and that commitment to regeneration, we were persuaded Lend-Lease to come in and acquire the Overgate Shopping Centre and to do a full redevelopment and refurbishment of it into the Overgate Centre that we have today. The process that we went through there was quite a remarkable one in the sense that it created a pattern for the future. The council is the ground landlord there. We own the ground. We are the ultimate arbiter of what happens on those sites. And we also granted it planning permission in under 3 months. And I think that speed and that conviction of action has been a consistent element of the regeneration works in Dundee. Later on today, you'll hear from Stuart Murdoch about the importance of culture within the city's regeneration. And the Rep Theatre was a major stepping stone in that journey for Dundee. I can remember when I was leaving the city as a graduate, the Rep project was just about underway. When I came back into my current role, we then went about solving the context for the building, because really in front of it was a muddy car park, and we put in a new piece of public realm, which really stitched that important cultural facility into a cultural quarter that worked in conjunction with the city centre. So again, there was a process whereby the council recognised that there was some kind of failure, whether it was market failure or public sector failure, went in and intervened, in this case by way of a CPO, and then carried out a piece of infrastructure work, physical infrastructure work, that achieved more than just beautification. It was actually about economic and social regeneration as well. And on the back of projects like this, the council became more confident, and the DCA, the Dundee Contemporary Arts Centre project, was, I think, quite seminal at the time of the first few years of the City Council after reorganisation, that the council would actually take forward a major cultural facility as part of its core regeneration initiatives. This was the old garage that occupied the site of the DCA. It's one of these multi-level garages with ramps within it. That's what it used to be. It was like you used to get at Christmas if you were a boy, many years ago. And what we did was actually to retain that building and to deconstruct it and reconstruct it as the DCA. That's virtually the same angle of photograph. And the DCA attracted a lot of attention to our city. I don't think I've seen as many journalists previously in Dundee on the day of that opening of that building. And it gave the city confidence in itself as a cultural place, as a place of genuine regeneration, and the fact that it had meaning beyond just an elite within the city and the region. It had a meaning to the rest of the communities in the city. So in terms of the regeneration of the centre of Dundee, when I arrived, we had a renewed Overgate, a very solid pedestrian area linking to the Wellgate. But one of the most challenging areas was the waterfront. The waterfront is the main entry point into the city, and therefore provides, or certainly in the past, provided the first impression of Dundee. And that first impression was exceptionally poor. What had happened over the years is that what had been once a fine set of Victorian dock had been infilled, mostly with tenements and listed buildings that had been knocked down by previous generations. And the Tay road bridge was constructed, coming right into the heart of the city and creating this mini motorway network, which effectively severed the connection between the heart of Dundee and the River Tay. And the River Tay is so important to Dundee. It's why Dundee is located where it is, and that relationship was completely damaged beyond, we felt, repair. So the red routes are all of the ramps and mini motorway networks, and the yellow are the high-level pedestrian walkways that were meant to connect the city centre down to the river. These were absolutely foul places. Here's an aerial view of the waterfront before the project began, and you can see that it is a fairly typical comprehensive redevelopment area that was proposed across the whole of the UK and Western Europe. Again, Dundee actually did it. And we felt that not only was it a problem in terms of the first impression that it created of our city and the barrier effect that it had, but it was also a fantastic opportunity because the context was stunning, south-facing over an estuary. Look at the land that's available there that in this format is completely unrealisable and undevelopable. We couldn't get any economic or social gain out of it. And when I say that it was a poor first impression, that's probably the first impression that somebody got arriving in Dundee. I'm a great believer in you make your mind up about a place in the first 5 minutes, and you'll spend a lifetime trying to change that view. And we had to, in some way, tackle this front door for the city. Not just, again, as a beautification project, but in order to allow us to continue to regenerate our economy and to ensure that that economic regeneration spread throughout the whole of the communities and society within Dundee and the surrounding region. We therefore formed a partnership with Scottish Enterprise. We undertook a study into the waterfront area. We embarked on probably one of the biggest public consultation exercises I'd ever been involved in up to that time. It was about an 18-month period of looking at different possible scenarios and potential master planning options for the area, testing those at each stage with the public in the city, with the business community, with the communities throughout the city, until we refined all of these options down to a final master plan, which was given something like 96% approval rating by the public in the city. And on the back of that overwhelming support, the City Council approved the master plan and adopted it as its vision for the waterfront area. One of the difficulties, however, was we had no budget to actually implement the project. And this is what we forget, perhaps, when we are at stages like you see outside the window. Everyone thinks, well, it's quite easy. Well, it isn't. You've got to have a long-term vision, and you've got to embark on that vision, but there are key staging posts that have to be overcome. and the budget was an absolutely killer for us. Fortunately, at the time, the City's Growth Fund was established as part of the Cities Review by the Scottish Government. Dundee, like the other cities in Scotland, were awarded substantial funding through the Cities Review, and we decided to use our Growth Fund allocation on a single project rather than spread it thinly across a number of projects. Many of the other cities in Scotland decided to fund perhaps 5, 10, 15 projects in their urban areas with that available funding. Dundee was the only city who decided that it had to be invested in a single game-changing project for the whole city. And it was unanimous within the Dundee Partnership and within our colleague councils in the Tayside area that the waterfront was that project. And that enabled us to start the infrastructure works that were necessary to transform the area. The model is quite a simple one, whereby the public sector, being the council and Scottish Enterprise, would intervene because of market failure, bring all of the land into a single ownership, put in the necessary infrastructure to allow for future private sector development, create that confidence and shovel-ready development opportunities, then engage with the private sector on a plot-by-plot, phase-by-phase basis to implement a mixed-use redevelopment of the area that was very much based on economic regeneration more than anything else. Here's an aerial photograph of the waterfront just before we started the infrastructure works. We acquired all of the remaining land that wasn't in public ownership. We then set about demolishing those lovely brutal buildings that you see in the foreground, and you can start to see the pattern developing of the new gridiron of streets that would create development sites, but also major areas of public open space that would link the existing city down to the river, and also allow for ease of pedestrian movement across the area from north to south and east to west. Those works continued through various phases of the City's Growth Fund. When the City's Growth Fund was then mainstreamed into council budgets, Dundee Council took the very brave view that it was going to continue to ring-fence that allocation within its capital plan. That, along with a matching allocation from Scottish Enterprise, allowed us to continue with the infrastructure works and see those through to completion. You'll notice in the foreground, in the bottom left-hand corner, the V&A starting to come out of the ground there, and I'll touch on that in a moment. And now we have a situation where all of the infrastructure is complete, apart from one site, which will start next year once the site huts for the V&A's construction are moved off the area of Waterfront Place that's in the foreground. And the popularity of this infrastructure has been quite remarkable within the city and the wider area. Slessor Gardens, which is the main public open space, has really been adopted by our citizens. Lots of new events taking place there, and it's also surrounded by smaller demonstration gardens that were installed just over 15 months ago and have absolutely no vandalism to them. Vandalism is always a good test of how much society and community is buying into what's happening to their area. I mentioned the V&A. The V&A was not part of the original master plan thinking for the waterfront. We did recognise that there was an opportunity within the waterfront to create something, some focal point, something that would actually ignite the whole regenerative process, but we didn't quite know what that was at the time. But we had the confidence to believe in ourselves to be able to recognise it when that opportunity came up. That opportunity was a dinner 12 years ago where Mark Jones visited the city of Dundee. Mark was the then director of the V&A in South Kensington in London. He was visiting Dundee University and looking at the work being undertaken in the College of Art here. There was a dinner for him in the evening before he went back to London on the flight the next morning. and a number of us were invited to join them for that dinner. And the conversation was about the importance of culture in regeneration projects. Very interesting conversation. The next morning, we offered to take Mark around the waterfront and show him what was happening. And from that, the kernel of an idea came for a possible V&A project within Dundee. And we're now at the stage, as you can see out the window, where the whole of the exterior of the building is now complete. We're working on the finalisation of the interior. The building will be handed over to the council early next year. We will then finalise all of that fit out, and it will be open in the second half of 2018. Very importantly, we have seen this project as being not about an iconic landmark building, because if it were merely that, then it would not achieve the wider socio-economic aims that we have. So it has to engage with the wider communities in Dundee and Tayside and have meaning for them on a number of levels, and also to link with businesses in the city as well, and to bring forward the notion that design is important to all businesses in our economy, and that Scottish design has made a difference to the whole of the world in terms of culture and development. Now, that's a very lofty ambition, and I think only the V&A could pull that off. The nature of the relationship is that the council has underwritten the construction of the project with funding from numerous partners, including the Scottish Government, and we will then lease the building to a local charity who will run it in partnership with the V&A, and we will access to all of their collection and their travelling exhibitions for the next 20 years. One of the key gateways into Dundee that was a major disappointment in the past was the railway station. I don't know if any of you can remember using Dundee Station previously. We really had to tackle that. Again, this has taken 15 years to bring forward the realisation of a new station concourse in Dundee. But what we've done is to ensure that that isn't just simply a station, it is actually something that's contributing to the economy of the area. So it will have a 120-bedroom hotel as part of it, retail accommodation, food and drink accommodation, and all of that helps to cross-subsidise the creation of the public facilities for rail passengers. Very importantly, we've engaged with all of the private sector companies on this project on the basis that they must pay the living wage. And one of the targets I've been given by my council is to ensure that that pattern is replicated right across the waterfront. It's hugely important that we are committed to the economic benefit of the developments that are happening in the waterfront ripple across the whole of the city in a really meaningful manner. So it's fantastic that there's two big public buildings coming near completion and will be opened next year. But the real economic benefit for Dundee will come from the private sector investment in mixed-use developments, particularly in terms of office accommodation, hotel accommodation, and also residential apartments within the area, so that it is a living area and is alive on a 24-hour basis. Site 2 and Site 6 are the two sites that we're bringing forward with private sector partners. The image here is of Site 2, which has been given the working name of Studio Dundee. So it's a development of new offices, new private rented sector build-to-rent accommodation, particularly aimed at retaining and attracting talent to Dundee. And then on the ground floor, a large incubator centre for creative and cultural businesses. We have identified creative and cultural sector as being of huge importance to the future of Dundee. We need to have a way in which we can ensure that that sector thrives and that we take the talent that we've got and build new businesses out of it. Site 6 is a mixed-use development directly opposite the V&A, and that will encompass new Grade A offices with support from Scottish Government, a new upscale hotel directly facing onto the V&A, and then residential apartments both for sale and for rent. Both of those developments are planned to start on site early next year. I think it's really important that as we reach the completion of some of the public buildings, that we see the continuity of investment and development activity within the waterfront. And therefore there will be cranes on the skyline again next year as these developments are realised. The Council is intending to participate in these developments so that we bring long-term stewardship to the area and that we also maximise the economic benefit to the city and to its inhabitants. So rather than just sell the land and walk away, we want to participate and be a long-term steward in that success. If you want to know more about the waterfront, please do look at our app, which is on Apple and all the other platforms. It's a fantastic way of understanding and experiencing the area in a three-dimensional manner. We've also got some virtual reality headset over there. Later on, you can have a go at that and try walking around the area. It really brings it to life. Before I finish, I really need to emphasise that Regeneration in Dundee has not just been about the waterfront. Yes, there has been a lot of focus on the waterfront, and the waterfront has helped to change people's impressions of our city and their image of Dundee as a place to invest and live and work and play. But we have been equally active in our numerous communities across the city. Ardler was a very good early example of a housing stock transfer that allowed the transformation of a 1960s high-rise development on the edge of the city into an urban village that is now thriving as a mixed community, along with the facilities that you would expect in an urban village. You will have the opportunity later today to go up to Whitfield and to see the progress that we've made in taking that Ardler approach and trying to replicate it within Whitfield, and in particular the Crescent facility, which provides the heart to that new community on the edge of the city. And then lastly, a good example of the way that we're regenerating our inner city is the work that we're doing in Lochee at the moment. So this is a work in progress where Lochee, formerly a very thriving inner city community in Dundee. In fact, Lochee would claim it was here before Dundee. They're very proud in Lochee. And we're working with the community there to put the heart back into that area and to repopulate it. So again, you'll have the opportunity to go and visit that. And hopefully from these you will agree with me that we haven't just simply focused on doing nice projects and trying to beautify the city. Yes, we've tried to do it to the highest possible quality because that counts, but it has been rooted in trying to make a big step change in the socio-economic background to this city. Thanks.